A bullied teen helped a blind man cross the street, not knowing he was a billionaire in disguise. The moment itself seemed so small at the time, just a fleeting interaction on a busy street corner that lasted less than 5 minutes. But for 16-year-old Ethan Parker, those 5 minutes would alter the trajectory of his entire life. The bruise beneath Ethan's eye had darkened overnight, blooming purple against his pale skin. He prodded it gingerly in the bathroom mirror, wincing at the tender flesh. Another masterpiece courtesy of Jason Mercer and his loyal followers. 3 years of torment, and somehow it never got easier. "Ethan, you're going to be late." His mother's voice echoed up the stairs, strained with the familiar tension that had become the soundtrack to their mornings. "Sorry, you're not coming?" he called back, his voice cracking. He grabbed his worn backpack, carefully adjusting the strap to avoid the spot where the seam had begun to tear. One more semester. That's all he had to endure before graduation. Outside, November greeted him with knife-edge cold that made his eyes water. Or at least that's what he told himself as he wiped away moisture from his cheeks. The walk to Westlake High School was exactly 18 minutes. 18 minutes of dread that built with each step, his stomach knotting tighter as the brick building came into view. Ethan hunched his shoulders against the wind, hood pulled low over his face. The weight of his sketchbook pressed against his back, hidden in the bottom of his bag where no one would find it. Drawing was his escape, the only place where the world made sense, where beauty could exist without fear of being destroyed. But even that private joy had become ammunition after Jason had found his sketchbook last year, ripping out pages and spreading them across the locker room floor while everyone laughed. The shrill bell of Westlake High rang in the distance. Ethan quickened his pace, rounding the corner onto Maple Street when he noticed the man standing at the crosswalk. An older gentleman with silver hair, impeccably dressed in a charcoal overcoat despite the shabby neighborhood. He held a white cane loosely in one hand, his head tilted slightly as if listening to the traffic patterns. Something about the man's solitary figure made Ethan pause. The crosswalk signal chirped its walk notification, but the man remained motionless, his free hand outstretched slightly, fingers trembling almost imperceptibly. For a moment, Ethan hesitated. Being late meant detention, which meant explaining to his mother why he'd missed his shift at the convenience store, which meant another fight about responsibility and bills and how they were barely hanging on. But the man's hesitation mirrored something Ethan recognized in himself, uncertainty masked by stillness. "Excuse me, sir," Ethan said, his voice barely audible above the morning traffic. "Would you like some help crossing?" The man turned toward Ethan's voice, revealing a weathered face with deep smile lines around his eyes. Though unfocused, his eyes were a startling shade of blue beneath silver brows. "That would be very kind," the man replied, his voice rich and deep with an accent Ethan couldn't quite place. "This intersection is more complicated than I remembered." Ethan tentatively offered his arm, and the man's hand found it with practiced ease, his grip firm but gentle. "I'm heading west on Maple," the man added. "That's my way too," Ethan replied, though it wasn't, not really. School was east, not west. As they stepped off the curb together, Ethan described the path. "There's a small puddle about 3 steps ahead. Now we're halfway across. Curb coming up in 4 steps. The man nodded appreciatively. "You're quite good at this. Most people either grab me like I'm about to float away or narrate every detail down to the birds in the trees." A small smile tugged at Ethan's lips, the first genuine one in days. "My grandmother was blind the last few years of her life. I used to help her around her garden." They reached the opposite sidewalk, but instead of immediately releasing Ethan's arm, the man lingered. "Would you mind telling me which building is the Westlake Community Center? I have a meeting there this morning." Ethan glanced at his watch. He was already 7 minutes late. "It's about 3 blocks this way. I can take you there if you want." The man tilted his head as if considering something. "I wouldn't want to make you late for school." Ethan startled. "How did you—" "Backpack," the man explained with a small smile. "And you have the hurried walk of someone with a bell schedule to keep. What's your name, young man?" "Ethan. Ethan Parker." "Well, Ethan Parker, I'm Henry, and I'd appreciate the company, but only if you're certain. 1 class." He'd only missed 1 class, Mr. Peterson's English, where they were discussing a book Ethan had already finished weeks ago. "I'm certain," he said, surprising himself with how true it felt. As they walked, Henry asked questions, not the invasive kind adults usually asked, but thoughtful ones about the neighborhood, about what Ethan noticed around them. For the first time in months, Ethan found himself speaking freely, describing the way morning light hit the frost-covered leaves, the colors of the storefronts, the pattern of cracks in the sidewalk. You have an artist's eye. Henry observed when Ethan described how the shadow of a fire escape created a perfect geometric pattern on the brick wall beside them. Ethan's steps faltered. I like to draw sometimes. Sometimes? Henry's tone was gently probing. Or whenever you can. The question hung between them, disarmingly direct. Ethan swallowed. Whenever I can, he admitted quietly. They reached the community center, a modest building with a faded sign and chipped paint on the handrails. Yeah, here we are, Ethan said, guiding Henry to the entrance. Thank you, Ethan. You've been extraordinarily helpful. Henry reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a business card, holding it out with remarkable accuracy. If you ever need anything at all, please call this number. Ethan accepted the card, turning it over in his fingers. It was heavy stock, embossed with a simple HW, and a phone number, nothing else. I should go, Ethan said, suddenly aware of how much time had passed. Henry nodded, but as Ethan turned to leave, he spoke again. Ethan, the world tries to tell us who we are based on what happens to us. Don't let it. Something in the man's voice, a certainty, a knowledge, made Ethan's chest tighten, as if Henry somehow knew about the bruise beneath his eye, about the torn backpack, about all the ways the world had been trying to define him. I'll try, Ethan whispered, then turned and ran toward school, the business card clutched in his hand like a talisman. By the time Ethan slipped into the school hallway, second period was already underway. He crept toward his locker, hoping to retrieve his chemistry textbook without being noticed by the hall monitor. The card from Henry was tucked safely in his wallet, a small, inexplicable comfort. Well, look who finally decided to show up. The voice made Ethan's blood run cold. Jason Mercer leaned against the bank of lockers, arms crossed over his Letterman jacket. At 6'2", with shoulders built from years of football, Jason had the physical presence of someone much older than 17. Leave me alone, Jason. Ethan tried to keep his voice steady as he spun his locker combination. Jason smirked, pushing off the lockers to tower over him. Heard you skipped first period. What's wrong? Afraid to show everyone that nice shiner I gave you? The locker door swung open, and Ethan reached for his textbook, trying to ignore the hammering of his heart. Just grab the book and walk away. Don't engage. But Jason slammed the locker shut, nearly catching Ethan's fingers. I'm talking to you, freak. Mr. Mercer. Mrs. Winter's sharp voice cut through the tension. The vice principal stood at the end of the hallway, arms folded. Don't you have algebra right now? Jason's jaw tightened, but he stepped back. Yes, ma'am. Then I suggest you get there. Now. With a final glare at Ethan, Jason stalked off. Mrs. Winters approached, her expression softening slightly as she took in Ethan's appearance. That's quite a bruise, Mr. Parker. Ethan lowered his eyes. I walked into a door. The lie hung between them, threadbare and transparent. Mrs. Winters sighed. My office is always open if you want to talk about these doors you keep walking into. But Ethan knew better. Talking meant making things worse. It meant being labeled a snitch on top of everything else. I'll be more careful, he mumbled. The rest of the day passed in a blur of careful avoidance and downcast eyes. By the time the final bell rang, exhaustion weighed on Ethan like a physical burden. He had a 4-hour shift at McLaren's convenience ahead of him. 4 hours of stocking shelves and running the register for minimum wage that would go straight into the envelope marked rent on the kitchen counter. The November darkness had already settled by the time Ethan pushed through the glass doors of McLaren's at 8 o'clock. His fingers were numb from arranging freezer items, and the fluorescent lights had left a dull ache behind his eyes. The walk home was 15 minutes through poorly lit streets. Usually Ethan moved quickly, earbuds in, eyes alert for trouble. But tonight, something made him slow down as he passed the community center where he'd left Henry that morning. The building was dark except for a single light in a ground floor window. Ethan paused, remembering the weight of the business card in his wallet. On impulse, he pulled it out, tracing the embossed initials with his thumb. What would it be like, he wondered, to have someone to call when things got bad? His mother tried, but she was drowning in her own problems. Working double shifts and still falling behind on bills, the grief of his father's death 3 years ago still etched in the premature lines around her eyes. A gust of wind cut through his thin jacket, and Ethan tucked the card away. Whatever kindness Henry had shown was just that. A moment of kindness from a stranger, nothing more. As he rounded the corner onto his street, Ethan noticed an unfamiliar car parked in front of his apartment building. Sleek and black, too expensive for this neighborhood. A man in a dark suit leaned against it, checking his watch in the glow of a streetlight. Ethan slowed, wariness prickling along his spine. The man looked up as Ethan approached, straightening when their eyes met. "Ethan Parker?" The man's voice was clipped, professional. Ethan stopped several feet away. "Who's asking?" "My name is Raymond. I work for Mr. A. Whitfield." The man reached into his jacket and produced an envelope. "He asked me to deliver this to you. Mr. Whitfield?" Ethan repeated, not moving to take the envelope. "Henry Whitfield. You assisted him this morning." "Henry, the blind man?" Ethan's confusion must have shown on his face because Raymond continued, "Mr. Whitfield was very impressed with your kindness. This is a token of his appreciation." Hesitantly, Ethan accepted the envelope. It was heavy, sealed with an embossed wax stamp bearing the same HW as the business card. "What is it?" Ethan asked. Raymond's expression remained neutral. "Mr. Whitfield also asked me to extend an invitation. He would be honored if you would join him for dinner tomorrow evening at his residence. I can pick you up at 6 if that's convenient." The absurdity of the situation hit Ethan all at once. A chauffeur, a sealed envelope, a dinner invitation, all because he'd helped someone cross the street. "I have work tomorrow," Ethan said automatically. Mr. Whitfield anticipated that might be the case. "He's already spoken with your employer, Mr. McLaren. Your shift has been covered." A chill that had nothing to do with the November air ran through Ethan. "He talked to my boss. How did he even know where I work?" Raymond's expression revealed nothing. "Mr. Whitfield is a thorough man. The invitation stands regardless. My number's in the envelope if you decide to accept." With a slight nod, he returned to the car and drove away, leaving Ethan alone on the sidewalk with the mysterious envelope. Inside his apartment, the familiar sounds greeted him. The hum of the ancient refrigerator, the drip of the bathroom faucet they couldn't afford to fix. His mother wouldn't be home for another hour. Ethan sat at the kitchen table and carefully broke the wax seal. Inside was a folded note on heavy cream paper and a check. Ethan's breath caught as he registered the amount, $5,000. The note, handwritten in elegant script, read, "Dear Ethan, your kindness this morning was exceptional, particularly given what I suspect you were risking to help me. This token cannot adequately express my gratitude, but I hope it might ease some burdens. The invitation to dinner comes with no obligations, merely a desire to thank you properly. Sincerely, Henry Whitfield." Ethan stared at the check until the numbers blurred. $5,000. More money than he'd make in 5 months at McLaren's. Enough to catch up on rent, fix the leaking roof, maybe even buy his mom a winter coat that actually kept her warm. But people didn't just give away money like this. There had to be a catch. And how had this Henry Whitfield found out where he worked, where he lived? The man was blind, but clearly not helpless, not ordinary. When his mother came home, feet dragging with exhaustion, Ethan had tucked the envelope away in his desk drawer. He needed time to think, to decide what this meant and what to do next. That night, sleep eluded him. The check and the invitation swirled in his mind alongside Henry's parting words. The world tries to tell us who we are, based on what happens to us. Couldn't say, don't let it. By morning, curiosity had won out over caution. Ethan would go to dinner, not to accept charity, but to understand who Henry Whitfield really was, and why he'd singled out one unremarkable teenager for such extraordinary attention. The address Raymond had given led to a part of the city Ethan had never visited, where sprawling estates hid behind wrought iron gates and towering hedges. As the car wound up a tree-lined driveway, Ethan fought the urge to ask Raymond to turn around, to take him back to the familiar confines of his neighborhood. "We're here, Mr. Parker," Raymond announced, bringing the car to a stop before an imposing mansion of limestone and glass. Ethan stared through the window, his mouth dry. "This is where Henry lives." "One of Mr. Whitfield's residences, yes." Raymond's tone suggested this wasn't even the most impressive one. The front door opened before they reached it, revealing a woman in her 50s with a warm smile and observant eyes. "You must be Ethan. I'm Mrs. Chen, Mr. Whitfield's housekeeper. Please come in." The interior of the house was both elegant and understated. Soaring ceilings and museum-quality art pieces alongside comfortable furniture that invited you to sit. It was nothing like the cold, untouchable luxury Ethan had imagined. "Henry is in the solarium," Mrs. Chen explained, leading Ethan through the house. "He likes the acoustics in there. Says he can hear the plants growing." She smiled as she said it, with the fondness of someone sharing a private joke. Ethan followed her through a set of glass doors into a space filled with lush greenery and soft ambient light. In the center, seated in a simple armchair, was Henry. He looked different here, more at ease, dressed in a casual sweater rather than the formal overcoat. His head turned at the sound of their entrance, a smile spreading across his face. "Ethan," he said warmly. "You came." Yes." Ethan struggled to reconcile this setting with the man he'd helped at the crosswalk. "Thank you for inviting me, Mrs." Chen disappeared with a quiet promise that dinner would be ready in 30 minutes. Henry gestured to the chair opposite his. "Please, sit. Would you like something to drink? I have everything from spring water to sodas to that hideously sweet energy drink all the teenagers seem to live on these days." The casual joke, delivered with a self-deprecating smile, eased some of Ethan's tension. "Water is fine," he said, perching on the edge of the chair. When they were alone, Henry leaned forward slightly. "You're wondering why I invited you here?" It wasn't a question. Ethan nodded, then remembered and said, "Yes, and you're wondering about the check." "I can't accept it," Ethan blurted out. "It's too much. I just helped you cross the street." Henry's expression grew thoughtful. "Did you know, Ethan, that in my 64 years, I've had thousands of people help me cross streets? Literal thousands. But do you know how many have done it the way you did?" Ethan waited, uncertain. "Very few," Henry continued. "Most people help because they feel obligated or because they want to feel good about themselves. But you were already late. You had a bruise under your eye that I'm guessing came with its own complications. You had every reason to keep walking, but you didn't." Ethan shifted uncomfortably. How did you know about the bruise?" A small smile played at Henry's lips. "I may be blind, but I have other ways of seeing. Raymond is very observant, and I've learned to listen for what people don't say as much as what they do." He paused. "The check is yours, no strings attached. Consider it an investment in someone who clearly deserves a break." "But you don't even know me," Ethan protested. "I know enough," Henry replied simply. "But I'd like to know more, if you're willing to share." There was something in Henry's voice, a genuine interest, not the prying curiosity Ethan was used to deflecting, that made the walls around Ethan's heart weaken slightly. Over dinner, a meal more delicious than anything Ethan had tasted in years, he found himself talking about his father's death in the construction accident, about his mother's struggle to keep them afloat, about the bullying that had started when his clothes became too worn and his lunch sometimes non-existent. Henry listened intently, asking questions that somehow never felt invasive. When Ethan hesitantly mentioned his drawings, Henry's interest sharpened. What do you draw?" he asked. Ethan pushed his half-eaten dessert around the plate. "Anything. Everything. Sometimes people, sometimes buildings or landscapes. Sometimes just ideas. Do you have any with you?" Ethan always carried his sketchbook, a reflex, a security blanket. Reluctantly, he reached into his backpack and withdrew the battered book. "You can't exactly see them, though," he pointed out gently. Henry smiled. "No, but Mrs. Chen can. With your permission, Mrs. Chen," who had been unobtrusively refreshing their water glasses, approached with a respectful air. Ethan hesitated, then handed over the sketchbook. She began to turn the pages, her expression shifting from polite interest to genuine admiration. "These are remarkable," she said, pausing at a drawing of an elderly woman tending roses. Ethan's grandmother before her eyesight failed. The detail in her hands. You can feel the years of work in them. She described each drawing to Henry, who listened with his head tilted, nodding occasionally. When she reached a sketch of the city skyline as seen from Ethan's apartment window, a study in contrast between shadow and light, Henry stopped her. "Ethan," he said carefully, "have you ever had any formal training?" "No," Ethan admitted. "Just books from the library and some YouTube tutorials." Henry was quiet for a moment. "I have a proposition for you. No obligation to accept and completely separate from the check, which is yours regardless." Ethan tensed. Here it was, the catch he'd been waiting for. "Westlake Arts Academy has a scholarship program for exceptional young artists," Henry explained. "The deadline for next fall's applications is in 3 weeks. I happen to sit on the board of trustees and I'd like to sponsor your application." Ethan stared. Westlake Arts Academy was one of the most prestigious art schools in the country. Even thinking about applying was laughable. The application fee alone was more than his family could afford, let alone the portfolio review process. That's impossible," he stammered. "Those kinds of schools aren't for people like me." Henry's expression grew serious. "What kind of person do you think you are, Ethan?" The question caught him off guard. "I'm nobody," he said before he could stop himself. Just some kid from the East Side with a secondhand backpack and a convenience store job. Is that how you see yourself? Or is that how you've been taught to see yourself? The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. He thought of Jason's taunts, of the guidance counselor who'd suggested he focus on practical skills, rather than art, of his own mother's worried expression when she caught him drawing, instead of studying for tests that might lead to scholarships for real careers. I don't know, he admitted, his voice barely audible. Henry nodded as if Ethan had confirmed something important. The application requires a portfolio of 20 pieces. Based on what Mrs. Chen described, you already have the talent. I can connect you with a mentor who can help you prepare the technical aspects of the submission. Ethan's mind raced. Why would you do this? Why me? Henry was quiet for a long moment. Because 30 years ago I was you, he finally said. Different circumstances, different struggles, but the same essential challenge. Being seen for who I could become, not who the world assumed I was. He smiled slightly. And because someone did the same for me, when I needed it most. As Raymond drove Ethan home that night, the city lights blurred outside the window. The check was in his backpack, along with Henry's business card and a new sketchbook. The first gift Henry had pressed into his hands as he left, with the simple instruction to draw what you see, not what you think you should see. For the first time in years, something unfamiliar flickered in Ethan's chest. Not quite hope, but perhaps its precursor. The possibility that his life wasn't as fixed, as predetermined as he'd believed. Over the next 3 weeks, Ethan's life developed a surreal dual existence. During school hours, he was still the same invisible Ethan, navigating hallways with downcast eyes, enduring Jason's increasingly frustrated attempts to provoke him. But evenings and weekends belonged to a different world. 3 times a week, Raymond would pick him up and drive him to a downtown studio where Elena Vasquez, a former Westlake Arts Academy graduate and successful illustrator, would review his work with a keen but kind eye. Your technical skill is intuitive, she told him during their first session, examining his drawings. But your perspective is what makes these special. You see beauty in unexpected places and pain in seemingly perfect ones. Under her guidance, Ethan refined his portfolio. She taught him about composition, about how to develop a cohesive body of work that told a story. He absorbed everything hungrily, staying late into the evening until Raymond would gently remind him it was time to go home. Henry called every few days, always asking thoughtful questions about Ethan's progress, never rushing or pressuring. Sometimes they just talked about books or music or the history of the city, conversations that made Ethan feel seen in a way he'd never experienced before. At home, things were changing too. Ethan had given his mother the check, explaining it as a scholarship for artistic mentorship, not entirely untrue. Her initial suspicion had melted into cautious relief as she paid off the overdue rent and repaired the aging car she relied on for work. I don't understand why this man has taken such an interest in you, she said one evening, watching Ethan sketch at the kitchen table. But I haven't seen you this alive in years. Ethan looked up from his drawing, a study of light falling through their newly repaired kitchen window. I think he sees something in me that I couldn't see in myself. The portfolio was completed 2 days before the deadline. 20 pieces that Elena declared not just good enough to apply, but good enough to be exhibited. Ethan could hardly believe the collection had come from his own hands. Cityscapes capturing the dignity and decay, portraits revealing the humanity in strangers, abstract pieces exploring the tension between confinement and freedom. On the day of the submission, Henry invited Ethan to his home again. Whatever happens with the application, he said as they sat in the solarium, I want you to know how exceptional your work is. Art isn't validated by institutions, but by its ability to make people feel something. And your work does that powerfully. Ethan studied Henry's face, the question that had been building for weeks finally spilling out. Who are you really, Henry? I mean, I know you're Henry Whitfield, but... He gestured vaguely at the mansion around them. Henry smiled, a hint of mischief in his expression. Wondering about all this? He waved a hand to encompass the luxury surrounding them. The short answer is that I founded Whitfield Technologies about 40 years ago. The company that made the phone in your pocket, among other things. Ethan's jaw dropped. You're that Whitfield? The Whitfield who revolutionized digital accessibility? But does this on... He stopped, confusion clouding his features. That day on the street, you were just standing there, alone. No security, no driver. Henry's expression grew contemplative. I lost my sight 15 years ago, retinitis pigmentosa. Progressive condition, nothing to be done about it. It changed how I navigate the world, but not who I am. He leaned forward. As for being alone that day, sometimes I need to remember what the world is actually like for people with disabilities when they don't have wealth as a buffer. It keeps me focused on the work that matters. So you were, what? Testing people? Ethan asked, unsure how to feel about this revelation. No, Henry said firmly. I was simply living a normal morning as millions of blind people do. The fact that you helped me wasn't a test you passed. It was a genuine moment of connection. One I'm profoundly grateful for. Something in his tone made Ethan believe him. Still, a nagging doubt remained. But why go to all this trouble for me? The mentorship, the academy application, it's so much. Henry was quiet for a moment. When I was 16, my father died suddenly. He finally said, "My mother worked herself to exhaustion trying to keep us afloat. I was angry, withdrawn, certain that my future had been decided for me by circumstances beyond my control." The parallels to Ethan's life were impossible to miss. One day I was sketching circuit designs in the back of my physics class when my teacher, Dr. Abernathy, noticed. Instead of scolding me, he stayed after school for months teaching me advanced electronics. He submitted my designs to MIT without telling me, helped me apply for scholarships I didn't know existed. Henry's voice grew soft with memory. He changed the course of my life not by doing everything for me, but by showing me doors I couldn't see and helping me find the courage to walk through them. He reached out, finding Ethan's arm with unerring accuracy. "That's all I'm doing for you, Ethan. Showing you a door. You're the one doing the hard work of walking through it." The acceptance letter from Westlake Arts Academy arrived on a snowy February morning. Full scholarship with a personal note from the dean praising the extraordinary emotional intelligence and technical promise, evident in Ethan's portfolio. His mother cried when he showed her, alternating between pride and worry about what this meant for their future. Henry helped them navigate those conversations, ensuring that the scholarship covered not just tuition, but housing and supplies, even arranging for Ethan's mother to receive financial planning assistance. "You've given my son his future back," she told Henry one evening, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you. Your son gave himself his future," Henry corrected gently. "I just removed some obstacles. And he's the one who showed kindness to a stranger, remembering his grandmother's needs even in the midst of his own struggles. That speaks volumes about how you raised him." In the weeks that followed, Ethan began to walk differently, head higher, shoulders straighter. At school, the transformation didn't go unnoticed. Jason's taunts grew more desperate as they seemed to bounce off this new, more confident Ethan. "What happened to you, Parker?" Jason demanded one day, shoving Ethan against the lockers with less force than usual, confusion evident in his expression. "You on drugs or something?" Ethan met his eyes steadily. "No, Jason. I just finally figured out that you don't get to decide who I am." Something flickered in Jason's eyes. Recognition, perhaps, of his diminishing power. He let go of Ethan's shirt and stepped back, uncertainty replacing his usual swagger. As spring arrived, bringing with it college acceptance letters for the senior class, the social landscape shifted subtly. Word had gotten out about Ethan's scholarship to Westlake, and suddenly the artistic talent he'd hidden for years became a source of reluctant admiration from his peers. "Could you draw something for my girlfriend?" asked Michael Torres, a boy who had witnessed Ethan's bullying for years without intervening. "It's her birthday next week." Ethan studied him for a moment. "I charge $50 for commissions now," he said calmly, "and I'm booked through the end of the month." It wasn't entirely true. He'd only done a few paid pieces, mostly arranged through Elena's connections, but the look of surprise on Michael's face was worth the small deception. One afternoon in late April, Ethan was sketching in the park when a shadow fell across his page. He looked up to find Jason standing there, hands shoved in his pockets, none of his usual entourage in sight. "What's all in your room? What do you want?" Ethan asked, tensing slightly. Jason shifted his weight, eyes darting to the drawing and back to Ethan's face. "I heard you got into that fancy art school." "Yeah." Ethan waited, bracing for mockery, but Jason just nodded, an unfamiliar expression on his face. "That's cool, I guess. You always were good at that stuff." He hesitated. "My dad says art school is a waste of money." Something in his tone made Ethan really look at Jason for the first time. Not as the tormentor who had made his life miserable, but as another teenager struggling with his own expectations and pressures. "What do you want to do after graduation?" Ethan asked, surprising himself with the question. Jason's expression clouded. "Football scholarship to state. Dad's alma mater." He said it like reciting a fact, not sharing a dream. Is that what you want? The question hung between them, dangerous in its simplicity. Jason stared at him for a long moment, then shrugged with forced casualness. Doesn't matter what I want. That's how it is. The echo of Henry's words rang in Ethan's mind. The world tries to tell us who we are based on what happens to us. Don't let it. It does matter, Ethan said quietly. It's your life. Jason's jaw tightened, a flash of vulnerability crossing his face before he masked it with a scowl. Whatever, Parker. Not all of us have fairy godmothers showing up to solve our problems. He walked away before Ethan could respond, shoulders hunched against some invisible weight. That evening, Ethan called Henry. They spoke regularly now, their conversations ranging from art theory to technology to philosophy. Henry had become more than a benefactor. He was a mentor, a friend, someone who understood Ethan in ways few others did. I saw Jason today, Ethan said after they'd discussed his latest project. The guy who used to bully me. He seemed different. You're different. Almost like he's trapped in a life he doesn't want. Henry hummed thoughtfully. Bullies are often fighting battles we know nothing about. It doesn't excuse their behavior, but it can help explain it. I almost felt sorry for him, Ethan admitted. Is that weird? No, Henry replied. It's empathy. The ability to see the humanity in someone who hasn't shown you the same courtesy. It's one of your greatest strengths, Ethan, both as a person and as an artist. They talked until the sky outside Ethan's window deepened to indigo. Before hanging up, Henry mentioned casually, I'm hosting a small gallery showing next weekend for emerging artists. Elena thought some of your work should be included. Would that interest you? Ethan's heart raced. A real gallery with actual people looking at my work? Henry chuckled. Very real with very actual people, including some Westlake faculty who are eager to meet you before the fall semester. Yes, Ethan breathed. Yes, I'd like that. The small gallery showing turned out to be in one of the city's most prestigious art spaces, with over 100 attendees including critics, collectors, and educators. 5 of Ethan's pieces hung on the pristine walls, professionally framed and lit. His mother walked beside him in a new dress, her eyes wide as strangers approached to compliment her son's talent. Elena introduced him to curators and fellow artists who treated him as a peer, not a high school student. And Henry moved through the crowd with easy confidence, his hand on the arm of Mrs. Chen, who described the artwork to him in quiet, detailed murmurs. Your work is selling, Henry informed Ethan halfway through the evening, a smile playing at his lips. 3 pieces so far. The gallery will handle the transactions, but the proceeds are yours, minus their standard commission. Ethan stared at him in disbelief. People are buying my drawings? For real money? Art is worth what moves people, Henry replied, and yours moves people deeply. As the evening wound down, Ethan found himself standing before his largest piece, a charcoal drawing of a street corner viewed from above, where a teenage boy with a backpack offered his arm to an older man with a cane. The light in the drawing fell in such a way that their shadows stretched toward each other, merging into a single, stronger shape. It's beautiful, came a voice beside him. The moment everything changed, Ethan turned to find Henry standing there, his expression reflective. For both of us, I think, Ethan said quietly. Henry nodded. You know, when you lose your sight later in life, people often ask what you miss seeing most. They expect me to say sunsets or faces or art. But what I really miss is witnessing moments of human kindness. Those small, unguarded instances when people show who they truly are. He turned toward Ethan, his unseeing eyes somehow finding Ethan's all the same. That morning, I couldn't see you stop to help me. But I could feel your hesitation, your decision to be late for something important because someone else needed help. I could hear the gentleness in your voice despite the pain I sensed you were carrying. Ethan swallowed against the tightness in his throat. I'm glad I was late that day. So am I, Henry said, smiling. So am I. Graduation day arrived under a perfect June sky. Ethan sat among his classmates in their blue caps and gowns, hardly recognizing himself in the person he'd become over the past 7 months. His name was called, and as he crossed the stage to accept his diploma, he spotted his small cheering section in the audience. His mother, tearful and proud, Elena whistling loudly, Chen elegantly applauding, Raymond allowing a rare smile, and Henry standing with them, clapping in the direction of Ethan's voice. Later, at the small celebration at their apartment, now brightened with fresh paint and repairs, Henry pulled Ethan aside. I have something for you, he said, presenting a small box. A graduation gift. Inside was a watch, simple but beautifully crafted, with an inscription on the back, "Time reveals who we truly are." HW. It was Dr. Abernathy's, Henry explained. "My teacher. He gave it to me when I graduated from MIT. I've kept it all these years as a reminder that our legacy isn't in what we accumulate, but in what we pass forward." Ethan slipped it onto his wrist, the weight of it both physical and symbolic. "I don't know how to thank you for everything." Henry shook his head. "Don't thank me. Just remember someday to do for someone else what was done for you. See the potential in someone the world has overlooked. That's how kindness becomes legacy." As summer unfurled toward fall and the beginning of Ethan's new life at Westlake Arts Academy, he found himself returning to the street corner where he'd first met Henry. Sometimes he would sit on a nearby bench and sketch the people passing by, businessmen rushing to meetings, mothers guiding children, teenagers absorbed in their phones. And sometimes he would help someone cross the street, an elderly woman with a cane, a father with arms full of groceries and a toddler in tow, a girl juggling too many books. Small moments, easily overlooked. But Ethan knew now that such moments contained worlds of possibility, that sometimes the smallest choice, to stop, to help, to see someone truly, could alter the course of not just one life, but many. On his last day before leaving for Westlake, Ethan completed a drawing he'd been working on for weeks, a triptych showing 3 scenes from the same street corner. In the first panel, a lonely boy with hunched shoulders helped a blind man cross the street. In the second, the same boy stood straighter, creating art that touched others. In the third, a young man reached out to help someone new, the cycle beginning again. He titled it simply Legacy. When he showed it to Henry, the older man ran his fingers gently over the textured paper, his expression one of deep understanding. "This is how it works," he said softly. "This is how we heal the world, one intersection at a time." Ethan nodded, looking at the drawing that captured everything he'd learned. That kindness ripples outward in ways we can never fully predict. That seeing others clearly sometimes allows them to see themselves. And that sometimes the person you're really helping across the street is yourself, crossing from who you were told to be into who you truly are.